Hey, everybody, welcome back to my first episode back in 2021, and looking forward to having David Secunda, who's the founder and CEO of WorkBright, on the show today. David, welcome. I'm looking forward to talking with you. Your company, I think onboarding employees is one of the most important things. That first experience is so critical. WorkBright is the leader in remote digital onboarding and streamlines and digitizes the traditionally paper-heavy, cumbersome process of onboarding new employees. And what I'd like to dive right into is what happens when people onboard the wrong way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, John, it's a pleasure to talk with you this morning.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting, just given the timing here, because we started this company 7 years ago, and it was really primarily serving employers that had distributed or remote workforces, and it was kind of born out of some of the pain points of my last company. And little did we know that we'd enter into this world of pandemic, where all of a sudden this concept of onboarding would be turned on its head, and HR professionals and your listeners would be immediately looking for solutions of how to safely bring people into an onboarding situation, get them to work as quickly as possible. So, this quick question of what happens when onboarding goes wrong, I think that that's changed over time. That's the reason I give this a little bit of a preface. Right now, which is kind of unique to the HR industry, we're talking about a time of health and safety for our employees. Like, that's our primary focus when we're thinking about onboarding is, in the past, potentially we'd put several people in a fluorescent lit room with a stack of paper and say, go at it. It was surely a process that was kind of the bane of the existence of new employees and HR administrators alike.
Yeah.
But now we also learned that that's probably a terrible idea during pandemic as far as health and safety is concerned. So I would say that the wrong way, when things go wrong, one, and primarily is something or anything that's going to put your workers at risk. And the second is just something that's going to provide a negative first impression of the company that takes employees kind of down the wrong path, and maybe third, something that really pulls administrators in the HR world away from what they like to do best, which is really interact with people. Those things that aren't tied up in paperwork and that they really do best, that we all got into the industry to do, and that we often discover is obfuscated by piles of paperwork and administration. So I'd say those are the three things that I would point to.
Yeah, no, those are good. I want to jump into companies putting their best foot forward day one, because I think onboarding, you're right. When you talk about negative first impressions, a lot of times there's so much time and energy to get people to come into the company, and then they get there and they hear things like, we're too busy, we're running around, with chickens with their head cuts off, this and the other. And onboarding is so important. And so before we even get into the onboarding element, how long should an onboarding process be?
Well, that's a great question. Onboarding is really not well defined. And so some people consider it to be one day or some hours. Others consider it to be 9 to 12 months until somebody is kind of past the period of potential likely churn from becoming a new employee in a new environment overall. We think of kind of onboarding in a lot of different capacities. So certainly the mindset of onboarding should start as soon as the decision is made to hire someone. And my feeling is that it should extend to the point that they are up to speed in their position, which can be several months. Now, that can have a number of different phases. At WorkBright, we have our big emphasis on what I would call tactical onboarding, which is that period between the decision to hire someone and then walking into training or virtually doing their training that first day. But then there's also the whole aspect of cultural onboarding, imbibing somebody in the core values and the philosophy of the company. And that's something that really should extend all the way through that entire period. It's incredibly costly to employers if they lose someone either in the period between when they've made an offer and when they come to work, or shortly thereafter when they've invested in training but haven't actually received the benefit of that employee's work. So that is the most important period of onboarding that demands the most time, focus, and effort.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm always a believer that onboarding really should never stop, because once we train somebody and they really understand how to do it, and then they get into the habit of doing it, then we onboard them to the next level, right? It's always, I mean, we change the name to training, but I find as a business coach, a lot of times companies aren't doing enough onboarding, aren't doing enough continual training. And so they get kind of stuck, right? And they get complacent. And so if you rewind that and reverse engineer that, how do you heal that in the initial, as you said earlier, in the initial mindset of once you hire someone? Just to expand on my thought on that, we look at the lifetime value of a client, right? What does a client cost us? What are the marketing dollars that we're going to spend to get a client? What's the lifetime value of that client? And I think a lot of times companies don't look at the lifetime value of an employee.
For sure.
So if I don't train that employee and if I don't onboard that employee right, then I'm actually losing money. Even though that person may be making money, they can maybe make me more and actually be happier. So when you rewind it to the mindset that you were talking about earlier, talk about just the mindset of onboarding and training.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something that ideally is driven from the top in an organization, and that it's kind of a core value of never-ending learning. And I feel like if there is not that emphasis from the top, it's hard to kind of build that into all of the systems, because often HR people are pushed hard to sheerly focus on the tactical, get people into the position, and move on to the next thing. I just
want to interrupt one thing. If you point to someone like a Jack Welch, he will say, and it's documented, that HR is the most important department in the entire company because they are all about the people. And so based on what you just said, I agree with you. A lot of times people look at HR as a very tactical role that does benefits or things of that nature, but really they are the power of the people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think by empowering your listeners to embrace that fact and own that, that is really when HR professionals come into their highest value to a company, is really kind of seeing that they're not paper pushers, they're not tactical people, they're responsible for truly the human resource, which is the lifeblood of the company. We like to call it the mission critical workforce out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now rewinding. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just thought that was a valid point. All right, so keep on going.
Well, the whole idea here in coming into a company, again, is to kind of have a very deliberate breadcrumbing to take people through the process and move them forward. And so I encourage people to kind of think about the onboarding process as these different chapters. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, one of the most overlooked chapters is the moment between an offer being made and them coming into work. Sometimes that is a month, a period of time. For seasonal companies, it could be several months. So an employment offer might be made in January, they don't start till May. And that is the time of kind of vulnerability. So not only do we want to get the tactical onboarding done during that time, like all the I-9, the W-4, all of the policies and procedures, licenses, certifications, all those things captured. But it's also very important to have ongoing communication. That is the time that this cultural onboarding begins. Messages from the CEO, little videos, potentially to pair them with another employee who kind of will be their Sherpa or their guide through the process of starting with the company. Those things can seem kind of extra at the time, but really they prove to be budgetarily smart endeavors, because they tend to keep those employees engaged. And as is typically the case, people are not just applying for one job, and the long tail of those applications often come through during this period of them heading towards their first day. So super important to engage them culturally and tactically to get them on board. And then we believe at WorkBright to put your best foot forward. We've had over 650,000 employees on board through WorkBright And by and large, we find that now this is really how employees want to onboard. In the past, onboarding was this process of walking into a room and sitting down and pulling out documents and doing this all at once. When we look at the use statistics on WorkBright, onboarding really doesn't occur that way anymore. So people will open up their onboarding packet, they'll look at their offer letter, they'll sign that offer letter, and then they'll remember, boy, my I-9, my passport is in that shoebox under the bed. I'll open it when I get home, but I have a copy of my driver's license here. I'm going to do it on my bus ride on the way home. And so it tends to occur in a shorter period of time with less friction, but not all in one instance. So when we survey employees, we really find this is how they want to onboard. It's in this presentation where it's all at their fingertips, but then they can kind of sequence it when they have those documents to get it done.
Right. Kind of like Netflix, kind of have a little bit of control over it. And right. Let's talk about digitizing. I want to talk about digitizing because I think this is a really important piece. I work with a lot of companies and I see a lot of companies who are not digitized. And I think if COVID taught us anything, it advanced us 5+ years to where we are, where right now we need to digitize. The average millennial stays at a job 3-4 years. We're training someone. I'm a big fan of knowing that they're going to stay 3-4 years. Let them, document and digitize everything they do. And so when the next person comes on board, all they have to do is then watch 50 videos, right? And then strategize on it. So how does a company begin to digitize if they haven't even digitized anything?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, the pandemic has forced many companies into the situation where they might have been tiptoeing along for years saying, hey, we got to get to this at some point. And then all of a sudden it was mandatory due to health and safety concerns. And what we saw by and large is that HR professionals, your listeners, I'm sure, are scrappy. When there's a job to be done, they stand up and they get that job done. And so initially we saw people converting paper into PDFs, emailing them out to people, doing video clips and sending them out to folks, very much homegrown solutions. And when faced with a problem that is often the life and death of the company, like this has to get done, that is absolutely the right path. So we recommend being scrappy, getting that job done. But as you then move into it and incrementally kind of move up the food chain to kind of move towards best practices. And unfortunately, email is not a best practice for onboarding because, as we all know, when you send a document, it sits in your sent file. Same thing for an employee when they fill out all of that sensitive information, that direct deposit information on PDF and email it back, it is in their sent file unless they deliberately delete it, which is uncommon, which makes it very vulnerable to hacking for the employee and for the company. So security, we start with health and safety in a physical world. We then very quickly need to think about security, health and safety in a digital world and move to a platform or a solution, whether it's WorkBright or something else, that's going to give that level of security overall.
Yeah. And I love it. Let's talk about you as a CEO of a company that has given up your office post-pandemic. You've got a company now that is fully remote, working with companies on remote onboarding. And so what was that transition like for you? And how did you ultimately, give up your headquarters and are you as productive remotely as you thought you would be?
Yeah. So I think it's the last 5 hires I have not met in person. It's been a complete Zoom relationship, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's the case for those folks who are coming up in our new hire process as well. And I would say overall it was pretty seamless for us. So we initially had a distributed workforce. So we had several folks in different states. And so we would always make best efforts to create an inclusive environment in all aspects of everything that we did so that any meeting that was in person could also be attended digitally. And so when pandemic really, started to bear its teeth, we made a quick decision to, at that point, temporarily go remote. And that, again, it kind of, out of necessity, forced us to complete those things that were kind of pending. And part of that was the initial training for employees. So we always obviously had digital onboarding in tactical sense.
Yeah.
But then we went to a fully digital system for onboarding employees. And that is a combination of pre-recorded content, document content, but we also have found a good mix in doing those things that really are best still to do live. And we really have a discerning approach to look at this overall picture of training and orientation and pick out those things that are going to be most important to do in a live fashion and deliver them in that manner. So overall, we've been, I feel, actually increasingly productive because it's allowed employees to have additional flexibility, which has been so important with so many of our employees having kids and homeschool and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. That is great. That is great. I'm glad to hear that. What's a couple questions, what's the number one thing companies need to do today that many are not doing in order to get onboarding right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I would say that it is, I would say the simplest thing would be to put yourself in a new employee's position and walk through your onboarding process and just see what it's like, because people lose perspective.
Well said.
In general, what tends to happen with onboarding is that there is a set of documents that over time just gets added to and added to. There's a new policy, a new procedure, and it's not looked at holistically. And this is one of the things we do customers at WorkBright is we look at the whole thing and we come back and we say, hey, these 10 forms you can probably combine into one. And this one is repetitive here. And let's not ask employees to enter the same piece of information more than one time in one place. And you really only get that perspective by going back and putting yourself through your own process to try it out.
Yeah, I love that. How do you market and do sales for your company in a pandemic world with a remote team?
It's really the biggest changes has been not doing in-person trade shows. And we've typically really enjoyed that one-on-one atmosphere that we get in trade shows. But aside from that, we've really committed to content as a big piece of our marketing. We try and put out a lot on best practices. We've also really done a lot of content during pandemic around critical issues to the HR industry and the industry at large. So we've done webinars on the PPP and forgiveness and all those sorts of things to try and bring people in to find WorkBright as a resource. So content is something that we've always leaned on pretty heavily. And then we've also looked at digital marketing, as many companies have, as probably our main means of reaching new customers.
Yeah, I love it. All right. You ready for a quick speed round, David?
Ready.
All right. Favorite book and why?
Oh my gosh. This is so funny. I get this question from time to time, and I don't want to have the same book that I think about all the time. And I got to say, this book that came to mind right now, and I have never said this before, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. When I was a little kid, I just referred back to the book.
That's so funny you say that. I just finished that book 2 weeks ago.
It's so funny. I don't know what reminded me of it, but I just, in this time of pandemic, sequestered at home, I just remember as a kid having this feeling of freedom and unbounded joyousness reading that. I just needed a little bit more of that right now.
Yeah. It's so funny that you mentioned that book. My rabbi gave me that book years ago, and I never read it. It's been on my bookshelf, and I finally read it 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it was great. I loved it. Simple message and a beautiful book. Yeah. Yeah. Best piece of wisdom you ever received?
I think it was when I was with learning how to rock climb, and the guide that I was with brought me to the base of El Cap as a few folks had just descended and unsuccessfully attempted a route. And he conversed with them for a couple moments and kind of heard them out on why they had turned down and turned back on the route, and then sat there in silence and then looked at me and just said, Dave, at some point in the future, it's pretty likely that you're going to be up on a route on El Capitan, and there's going to be a million good reasons to turn back, and there's only going to be one good reason to continue, and that's your commitment. So when you're ready, fully commit, and then go get it. And that has been something that's just stuck with me across business and personal pursuits and other things going forward.
I love that. Wait, isn't El Capitan the it goes straight up? I mean, there was a movie on that about the guy.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Did you climb it?
Yeah, I've done 7 or 8 routes on El Cap. I did my first, I did the nose route, I think when I was 18 for the first time.
Wow. That's an unbelievable accomplishment. So minus the piece of wisdom, what was one piece of your mindset that you had when you were climbing that got you to the top?
Well, it's funny because I had forgotten that whole conversation that I had with this guide. And sure enough, it was a couple years later that I was on the nose route, and we were 3 days up and a storm moved in. And these clouds just literally, I woke up in the morning and I looked below me and it was blanketed with clouds below us. And immediately I was like, wow, I guess it's time to get the hell out of here. I think we got to go down. And it was almost like this little cherub, this appearance of those words coming back to me. And I just literally heard them echoing in my head. There's a million reasons to go down. Your commitment is the reason to go up. And just kind of with that renewed commitment, hunkered down, sat out that storm, continued on, and completely finished up, successfully getting over the top.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to say for those listening who don't know what El Capitan is it's a vertical rock formation at Yosemite National Park that's 3,000 feet from the base to the summit, and it's the tallest face, and it's a really unbelievable feat. So congratulations on that.
Thanks, John.
That is great. One piece of wisdom, David, that you would give somebody graduating college today.
Discover what your unique ability is and follow it with just high commitment and complete zealous going forward. So the unique ability, just to share what I think that is, it's something that you have a superior skill, a never-ending thirst for learning, but most importantly, it's the thing or things that you love to do that give you more energy than they take. Yeah. And then look for work that delivers an increasing amount of work in your unique ability.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add to that, because I couldn't agree more, and I talk about that all the time, is many times, what comes naturally doesn't feel like a gift because you think everybody can do it or has it. Correct. And that there sits your unique ability. So I think a lot of times people, David, have a hard time actually finding that. So this has been great. Tell everybody, David, your ideal clients and how to get a hold of you.
You bet. Yeah. Thanks for that question. So you can always find us at WorkBright.com, and especially check out the blog. I think you'll find a lot of great content there. Our ideal customers are those that are hiring a lot of employees. So, typically if you hire 75 people or more per year, up to tens of thousands, that is really our sweet spot. And especially if you have complexity in your onboarding. So you're regulated, you're legislated, you have some sort of accreditation that requires licenses and certifications. Those are the things we really do well.
Yeah. I love it. I appreciate you, David, being on the show. I think onboarding is one of the most critical things that any company can do. It's just so important to do it right. I agree with you. It's so critical to have that first impression be positive. And it's so important, I think, for companies to be innovative and digitized and give people options on how to learn and just be cognizant that it's not a 1 day or a 1 week. Sometimes it can last many, many months and sometimes up to a year. So I appreciate your insights and everything that you shared today. WorkBright.com. It was a pleasure getting to know you. Congratulations again on the climb. And that says a lot about probably how you attack your business as well. So appreciate it. Thanks everybody for listening. If David can help you, feel free to reach out. Thanks everybody. Happy New Year.